So I've heard you call yourself a psychopath and a sociopath. Which one do you prefer?
I don't really have a preference. When I was talking to a group of British people, they were like, we don't really use the word sociopath. We only use psychopath. So then I started understanding that to be more the international term.
My guest today is deaf, and 100% of the people who I've told about it have responded with some version of like, she's just willing to admit it out loud? Why would you want to talk to someone like that? I sure hope you did the interview from jail. And other people just said, ugh. It breaks my heart a little bit, but I understand it because the deafness is not to sound waves, but to other people's experience of pain. She's missing what's called affective empathy, or the ability to feel someone else's pain. She's a psychopath. And if you've been with me very long, you know that I've got a lot of problems with the way that we talk about that group of people. Maybe it's significant, maybe it's not, that we call them psychopaths as opposed to people with psychopathy. You have Parkinson's, you have schizophrenia, you have depression. Maybe depression has you. But for the people who gross us out the most, we assume that it's because of their lack of character. If they were more like me, they wouldn't have chosen to be a gay. They wouldn't have chosen to be a psychopath. They wouldn't have chosen to be born a... I'm not allowed to say black or Jew here, am I? Maybe we don't need to drive the point home that hard. But suffice it to say, I think it's a courageous thing to admit to being something that you know that the rest of your community is not going to like. Probably a whole lot. So today, I'm legitimately thrilled to be talking to a person who writes under the name of M.E. Thomas, one of the few people who I've found who speaks openly about what it's actually like to live with psychopathy, as opposed to the dozens of books that are out there about those people and what makes them act so, well, not like us. It could have been you. That's all I'm saying. It could have been you. Would you still be able to experience love? Yes, she does. Would you continue being a Mormon? Yes, she is. Would you be brave enough to be honest about who you were instead of trying to conform to what your community wanted you to be? Probably not, and that's why she's better than most people are, if internal honesty or integrity is worth anything. Anyway, I considered it a huge honor to talk to one of my favorite authors, M.E. Thomas.
What are some questions that you think that people are probably afraid to ask you that you wish that they would?
I think people probably are afraid, honestly, to realize how sort of non-dysfunctional I am. I think people assume, like I've gotten this a lot, people assume that something like empathy is what makes us human. And to understand that there are people out there who don't experience empathy the same way that everybody else does, I think really calls into question their beliefs about what makes somebody human. Then, if that's kind of your assumption that empathy makes people human, you find out that some people don't have empathy, then I think your next thought is that person's not really human then. And so I think sometimes people are reluctant to ask me questions that are humanizing of me, to learn that I just have a normal, ish life. I have passions. I'm a musician and I have a girlfriend and we've been together for 8 years. She's also psychopathic and I am a high functioning, I guess, member of society. Like I teach the church babies music on Sundays, and I'm a lawyer, for like a company that does like these big events that, tens of thousands of people go to or whatever. Like I have, in a lot of ways, probably a very good existence that people would even be jealous of. And I think that kind of complicates things because I think sometimes people actually suffer because of their empathy, but still lean into it because they think that there's like a moral good there to their experience of empathy. And I just don't have the same sorts of moral beliefs. Like I don't really have a tendency to want to label things morally good or morally bad. It's more like that's just what happens to be. And I think that is like a can of worms for people. Like that's opening up an existential can of worms. So I think that's more the type of thing I think people are really afraid of asking. The things that people love to ask are, you know, crazy, like, tell me the worst thing that you've ever done, or tell me, you know, the most heartless thing that you've ever thought, or whatever. But the truth is that the worst thing that I've done is, you know, not even as bad as people who do have empathy. You know, people, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, is that I just have different emotional triggers than a normal person. You know, my emotional trigger is when somebody tries to exercise authority over me who doesn't have authority over me. That's a huge emotional trigger. And for me, it goes from like 0 to irrational, like very quickly. I call it gray rage. And that's when I've done like all of my worst things, had my worst thoughts. But in law school, in criminal law, we learned that if you walk in on your spouse having sex with somebody else, and you get so angry that you pull out a gun and kill them both, that's not even murder. They don't even consider that murder, because they're like, well, nobody could be expected to not be so emotionally triggered in that moment that we're not even going to consider it murder. So I just think, you know, we just have different emotional triggers.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't seem like there's anything that any psychopath could do that a non-psychopath couldn't also do. Just they need the right story.
Yeah, I think that is so interesting. I've especially been interested in the stories that we tell ourselves since doing ayahuasca a few weeks ago.
First time?
Yeah, first time. Have you done it before?
I have not.
Yeah, it was my first time doing ayahuasca, and I was surprised how much the stories that we tell ourselves is kind of a part of the ayahuasca experience, where it's trying to loosen up some of the rigidity around that. You know, I think of like, I live on the coast, and so stuff gets rusty so quick. And if you're doing any sort of bicycle maintenance, then that's a true problem. So it'll get like rusty and tight, these screws or whatever. And the longer it's been since they've moved, you know, they've been removed, the worse it is. You know, so stiff that maybe you're having to use like WD-40 or something like multiple times, and then coming back, you know, weeks later or something, still trying to work on it type thing. And I think that the stories we tell ourselves can be that way. They can get really stiff and rigid if we haven't even touched them in a while. And I think by touching them, that's kind of what the ayahuasca seems to want to do, is like have you revisit things with a little bit less rigidity. It's like a little bit like WD-40, just trying to get in and be like, hey, you know, are there some things here that you haven't revisited in a while? And I think like any system, you know, we're all systems. In fact, we're multiple systems: the mind, the heart, you know, the emotional side, the psychological side, the body side. We have all these kind of systems, and even like break it down, like the defensive mechanisms, the cardiovascular system. Like we have systems upon systems. And one thing that I found actually really interesting is during ayahuasca is I learned that I breathe incorrectly, and that I actually will stop breathing during certain mental states. So during the first night of the ayahuasca, like you know, tripping my balls off, so to speak. But then after like 5 or 6 hours of this, like my brain was like, kept waking me up and being like, we're dangerously low on oxygen. Like
Right.
you've been like stopping breathing periodically, you know, for the past 5 hours. And now like basically kind of telling me like, hey, this will lead to brain damage unless we keep, you know, you wake up and keep breathing. And then, you know, I'd wake up out of the trance, and then I'd kind of go fall back asleep again, and then wake me up again. And in my hypersensitivity state, I could even kind of tell like when there was like a breeze, like move my mouth just a little bit to catch the breeze of the fresher oxygen. And it's just been something that I have been working on since then. Like I worked on it the second night of the ayahuasca, and I've been working on it since then. Like just I think yesterday I woke up from a nap, or 2 days ago, and like gasped for air twice, like. And I was like, I realize I'm doing it again, you know, but it's just something that is not forefront in my mind. But now I follow on social media all this like proper breathing technique people. And I'm just trying to retrain my brain. But that's what I think about, you know, is that humanity is something that is really complex. And whatever your view of humanity is, what makes or not doesn't make somebody human is probably a story that you're telling yourself. It definitely is. Everything that we kind of believe is a story that we're telling ourselves. But like, when was the last time you kind of revisited that and thought, hey, does this seem a little bit juvenile? Maybe like, when did I come up with this belief? Why did I come up with this belief? I think, beliefs can be so strong and so powerful, especially when they inform uh, things that are really hard. Like how I've been getting over my hysterectomy surgery. The belief that this is actually going to help me, it's going to make me better, even though I'm experiencing this now, has been very strengthening. It's been great to have that belief. And if I thought it was a bad thing, like a gunshot wound that I was recovering from, I probably would have recovered slower. So beliefs can impact us so much. And I think they can limit us, as well. They have an impact both for positive and for negative. And sometimes we don't even realize what our beliefs are. So I think that's one good thing about psychopaths, is that they're kind of like ayahuasca for normal people. I think they have like a tendency to like WD-40 up your beliefs, the stories that you're telling yourself.
If you're willing to look at it that way, which is, I feel like that's not the way that people look at it, which is why I'm personally interested. Like, the willingness that most people have, the freedom most people have to just use that term as a blanket insult. Like, we all understand this is the definition of pure evil. Like, what are you, a psychopath? Like, I'm old enough to have been in a time when, if someone calls you gay, like, homosexuals don't really exist. That's just a thing that we say to insult you, to make you, to say that you're stupid, or that you're evil, or that you're weird, or that you're whatever. But like, homosexuality is not like, those aren't real people. And so I feel like the same has to be true about the terms sociopath or psychopath, or, I mean, frankly, and I'm not, of course, allowed to say this out loud. That's how opposed people are to it. But like, even the term like pedophile, like, if you're born with an attraction to kids, like, I think that just sucks. Like, and if you do like what you do, of course, there have to be rules about what can and can't be done, because we're trying to run a society here. But also, like, the human that has that thing is not like inherently evil, but we just use it. Like, if you want to insult somebody, you just call them one of those things. Like, that's really troubling to me as a person who's wanting to know the span of human experience.
I totally agree. My pinned tweet on Twitter is, sociopaths may or may not be responsible for their actions, but they're certainly not responsible for being a sociopath. And I think that with what you said regarding, we have to have rules of society, to protect people mostly, is why we have to have rules, and if we have a rule for some other reason than protecting people, if it's just for our own comfort or we want conformity or whatever, then I think that's where we need some WD-40. Sometimes we get in a rule-making state of mind and start creating rules where we're not really protecting people. We're just doing it for our own comfort, power, whatever else. But I agree with you about pedophiles. I often feel there in California, for a long time, there's what's called a criminal diversion program. So if somebody commits a crime and it's determined that they did the crime in for significant reason because of a mental health disorder, they're schizophrenic and they were off their meds or whatever, and they committed the crime, then instead of sending them to prison, you can divert them into a mental health, not even like an institution, just like a program to help them with their mental health needs, to sort of address the real cause, the real root of the crime. And the only people for a long time who were not allowed to use that were borderline personality disorder, psychopaths, antisocial personality disorder, and pedophiles. And then I've heard somebody told me, that I haven't looked it up yet, that the borderline people have been taken off the bad list. So now it's just psychopaths and pedophiles who are not allowed. Yeah, you have to go to prison if you're a psychopath or whatever, or a pedophile. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. I just think it's interesting that we have a belief that everybody else, every other mental disorder except psychopaths and pedophiles, we want to help them, and we understand that, mental disorders are not a choice, and et cetera, et cetera. We have like some level of understanding about this and think these people don't just belong in prison or something, that we have some obligation maybe as a society to try to address the root cause if that's what's causing them to behave inappropriately in society. And we just don't have that belief as a society for psychopaths and pedophiles. Not yet. And I wonder who's actually going to be next. Who do you think is going to be next to get off the list, the bad list? Is it psychopaths or is it pedophiles?
Well, I mean, honestly, who's going to vote for that bill, though, with the way that culture is? Like, I don't know how even if you were a legislator and you felt that way, like, you're not going to get reelected. Like, you're known as the, like, pro-pedophile guy. Like, no thanks. I'm going to vote no, even though my conscience says it's probably the right thing to do. So I don't know. That's a tough one. Have you seen a change in the attitude towards psychopaths in the past decades?
I have, for sure. I think it reminds me, I forget the who it is, Sam Cooke, maybe. A change is going to come. Where it's he's singing this, do you know the song, Civil Rights Era kind of song in the 1960s, and he kind of just talks about the bad things, and then he's like, but I know a change is going to come. Oh, yes, it will. And that's how mostly I feel like you can kind of sense in the air that there's a change more than I think there is like a definite change. Like I have always gotten emails from people being like, hey, I support you and you've changed my mind about psychopaths. Back 15 years ago, I've gotten these sorts of emails, and I still get them today. So I wouldn't say that is the huge change. But for some reason, I don't know if it's just meeting the right people, but my life has gotten more stable and better recently. There's like a few key people in my life that have just been like, I don't care that you're a psychopath, or I do care, and it's positive that you're a psychopath, that makes me like even like you better. Or so like certain jobs, like I've been fired 2 times that I know for sure, in which there was like a legal settlement.
Wow.
For being a psychopath. And then other times too, where I'm sure I just wasn't given the right opportunities or didn't get the opportunities I could have gotten because of it. But there've been like some key people. One of them is I teach paralegal classes, and one of the directors of the programs, she's like probably well into her 60s. Hopefully that's correct aging of her. But she is gay, and she is kind of more masculine gay. She like wears pantsuits and loafers and stuff like that. And so you just wonder, like, what would it have been like for her when she was going to law school, when she was first getting jobs? Because we know even Sandra Day O'Connor, famous American Supreme Court jurist, the first female Supreme Court justice, I think she got denied entry to Harvard or something. She had to go to Stanford, where they were letting women work. And then when she was trying to get jobs, they were like, we don't really have a paradigm for you. Like the only women we have working at these firms are secretaries. And it's just kind of like these trailblazing people. And so I think she, this particular boss was just like, no, I'm not going to let this happen to somebody else. I don't, like, she saw psychopathy and the prejudice against psychopaths as similarly unbased in reality to what she experienced probably as a young gay person. So I think there are people like that who are able to kind of make that leap along with me. Interestingly, like the people who are like what I would say uber empaths, highly empathetic, are often the best people to be around psychopaths, because I think they do feel badly for me, and the other psychopaths, they, kind of like you say, you might be uber empathetic if you think pedophiles are okay, because I feel like they...
Wait. Time out. I did not say pedophiles are okay. I said it would suck to be born that way, and your choices determine what your punishment should be. Sorry.
Totally. If you're just a pedophile and you haven't acted on it, though, you would say that's okay, right?
Well, honestly, I think you're a saint. Like, because if you tell me that, like, the worst thing in the world is to be attracted to women, and that, like, that's just not, like, what are you? Like, a heterosexual? Like, you people should be hung or like locked up or something. Like, for me to not act on that impulse for my entire life, like, I deserve an award. Somebody, and of course, I can't tell anybody that I like women. So like I'm having to hide it this whole time, and then I don't act on it my whole life. Like, there's no saint in history who deserves more accolades than I do. So yes, I absolutely think that like those are some of our best people. I don't know why they are willing to live like that, but I'm grateful that they are.
Yeah, I agree. If you're able to see the perspective of how hard that is, though, I do think, that does suggest maybe like a heightened degree of empathy, because most people aren't able to get there.
So where in your life do you prefer to have psychopaths, and where do you prefer to have empaths?
That's a really interesting question. Honestly, for me, I prefer to have people who are able to think rationally and have good personal boundaries. And both psychopaths and empaths can do that. But honestly, sometimes let's say, lower functioning, let's say maybe they haven't used enough WD-40, the lower functioning psychopaths, sometimes they're incapable of that. They're incapable of the impulse control required to maintain like decent personal boundaries. And sometimes empaths can be incapable of it for different reasons.
Yep.
Their feelings, their emotions are so strong. So it's like the ones controlled by their impulse control, the other ones like emotional dysregulation. And so if you have people who are kind of bad at emotional regulation, or you have people who are bad at impulse control, they can both be bad, I guess. And then with regard to rational thinking, because one of my favorite things, sort of, let's say, life passion, especially recently, is to meet reality where it is, to meet the reality of myself where it is, to meet the reality of other people where they are, and to meet just the reality of everything else that's happening, the context where it is, and not need to live in sort of a fantasy or to try to delude myself because I'm uncomfortable with things just as they are in this moment. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't want them to change. I want the Wheel of Time series on Amazon to get renewed for additional seasons, certainly. But I'm also meeting reality where it is, which is it hasn't been. So I like to be around people who are able to do that. Psychopaths, it's easier for psychopaths to do that for certain things, for emotional things that would trigger somebody emotionally, like loss, grief, kind of lost hopes, dashed hopes, or, like, I think psychopaths can withstand kind of discomfort a little bit better. Certainly moral gray areas they're better with.
You say withstand, like, that feels to me like enduring. Like,
Yeah.
but does that mean that you're feeling it and you're enduring it, or you can withstand it because you're not feeling it as much?
I mean, you can be in the reality and stay in the reality, even though it's uncomfortable. Whereas I think like normal people want to kind of pop out of reality at a certain point if they're emotionally triggered, or if it's too emotionally painful, or just too emotionally fraught. Sometimes it's even like really happy things they want to kind of check out of reality rather than be just embodied in that reality when it's happening. For whatever reason, I think psychopaths it's easier for them to meet reality in those kind of emotional situations than people who have, let's say, a stronger emotional identity. I think it's harder for those people to stay in reality and kind of check out. It reminds me of, like you watch these hospital dramas or whatever, somebody's in such pain that they pass out, And so it's like the emotional psychological equivalent of that. You can withstand so much, discomfort or, moral gray area or something, and then you tap out. And then psychopaths just have a stronger stamina, I guess, in those sorts of areas. But I think psychopaths they have less stamina for like staying rationally in reality for other things. I think like they have a tendency to be megalomaniacal. And I think one of the main reasons why they have like kind of this grandiosity of self, and it's not always like, doesn't manifest itself always as straight narcissism, the way that you would kind of expect people who have like a big ego to have, but just kind of like this thought that they are like a puppet master and that they're pulling the strings, more like a Dick Cheney than like a Bill Clinton type. Bill Clinton, charismatic and probably wants to be loved or something. Psychopath doesn't want to be loved, but does like to think, that they are a power broker. So I think that those are sort of the delusions that appeal to psychopaths, is if they're in a situation where they don't feel like they have a lot of power and control, they may delude themselves into thinking, that's when they'll check out of reality, is be like, actually, even though some of you call me a loser in my mom's basement, I'm actually, this powerful hacker or whatever else, and I'm going to prove it because I'm going to like mess around in people's lives and show you how powerful I am. So I think that those are delusions that people experience, and I just prefer to be around people with low delusions, but both empaths and psychopaths are subject to being delusional, but just in different areas.
So then if you've got a best friend, two best friends, and one of them is an empath versus one of them is a psychopath, how do you relate to them differently?
I think you go to the one for different reasons. And I think like a good illustration is what do my friends go to me for? One of my friends is married to this guy who was previously married and had kids with a previous relationship, right? So she has to deal with the mom of the kids all the time. And when there's a birthday party for one of the kids, who's like first to get invited is me because she knows I'm going to come in there with that big dick energy and just like boss up and shut down any sort of nonsense that might be happening from the mom of the kids, just any kind of attitude. And she just likes knowing that I'm like the muscle, it would be like showing up to, a place where you're like a little nervous, like maybe like Mardi Gras or something, with just like a huge, like 300-pound gorilla type person that, if anything happened, they're just gonna like lift you up, throw you on their shoulders and like walk you out of there, So I think that's why people come to me. And that's why I go to psychopaths too. They can be like very, in the moment especially, show like a huge degree of sort of altruistic bravery, and they've actually been studied for this, is that psychopaths are more likely than normal people to run into a burning house, to try to save babies or kids or whatever, for various reasons. They experience less fear. I think they like the thought of like being, not even necessarily like a hero, but just so powerful in that moment. The person that can be the difference between life or death is like very powerful, and I think kind of appealing to them. And my girlfriend, though, in our relationship, since she's psychopathic also, so there have been times when I will be like, I want like a hug. And she'll be very kind of like cold. We joke around sometimes in the kitchen, like if we get in each other's way, she'll be like, "Excuse me," and she'll say it like that. And I'll be like, "Ooh, my heart!" It's like chilling me to the bone or whatever. Like very impersonal. And you kind of have to. Sometimes you have to kind of tell her like, "Hey, I want to have." Like a time, like we schedule times for like emotional bonding sometimes, because it's like she has to have that prep time to shift into kind of that way of thinking a little bit more like, okay, yeah, we can do that later this afternoon or something, and right now I'm just like hyper focused on this other thing. And sometimes that's a lot of what it seems like, is there's like I think an intentional issue to psychopathy where they tend to compartmentalize, like hyper-focus on one thing to the exclusion of everything else. In fact, sometimes I've been gone and I'll call her and I can tell that I'm not on her radar anymore, like at all. Like I've basically just fallen off her radar and she like doesn't even remember me. She doesn't talk to me as if, we've had this like long history of loving each other. She just talks to me as if, I was like telemarketer.
So then what is the answer to that when you're wanting to connect with a psychopath, and like does she, what's her response to you? How do you work that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just understanding that is a tendency, an intentional thing, and not taking it personally. And even kind of like megalomaniacal things too. Like I have been guilty before of being like, I could totally seduce this person. And I think that used to hurt her feelings, because it kind of suggested that I wanted to seduce these people and, she's not enough or whatever else. So I think it's just kind of understanding that there is a tendency, let's say, that comes with the personality disorder. A personality disorder is like a fixed tendency towards particular things psychologically. And to just kind of understand that somebody cannot change fundamentally who they are in that moment, even if you kind of want them to.
Yeah.
But to understand, change is possible. And if you kind of ask for things, and say, this thing is really important to me, then give them the chance to kind of be like, okay, I can see that it's important to you. And then let them come up with a solution about like, I think I can get to your need, later today or later this week or later this month, or I'll work on it with my therapist, and we don't know what's, when it's going to be fixed or whatever, but that I'm working on it. And I think that's only possible though, because both my girlfriend and I had gone through therapy. I had already been through like 4 years of therapy and had like graduated, kind of, my therapist said, when we met, and she had just been starting, but she was working on stuff. And so it was like, you just kind of work things out. But it's hard because it's hard probably for every human when you are connected that way, but you are also an independent being who has your own, let's say, kind of circadian rhythm almost that you're on, like this rhythm, this pattern. You want to do things when you want to do them. And that's what feels best to you, is to follow that rhythm, but then to try to, she uses the word blend, to try to blend into somebody else's rhythm. You of necessity are going to be sacrificing things, but to realize also, like, if I need a hug now, do I need it right now? Does it have to happen the way I need it? Or, can I be a little bit flexible about allowing her to find her own way of getting to it? Not trying to force it.
This sounds just like normal, regular, good relationship advice. Like this
Yeah.
has nothing to do with psychopathy. This is just like, say what you need and then try to work out a compromise and try to see it from the other person's perspective.
Yeah, and not expecting people to be different in the moment, I think is the really big thing. Like, not taking offense if she's like not feeling, super connected to me, or like she wants to spend time with me in the way I want her to spend time with me in that moment because she's so busy with something else. Like respecting the fact that she has her own internal world that is just as deep and rich as mine, and that is, just like thousands of variables deep, like just going off at any time. And I'm just one of the variables, and just understanding that that's just reality. There's nothing that can change that about a person because that's just how complex we are.
Yeah, again, like this just seems like the human experience. Like this is yeah, no, but you're talking about your internal world, and I don't feel like I've got a good grasp on what it means to have some lack in the sense of self and also an internal world. Those seem connected to me.
Say that last part. Some lack of sense of self and what?
And well, your internal world, like my internal world is myself.
Oh, yeah. So there's like a before and after to this. Like before I developed a sense of self through the therapy. So like, which I started doing like when I was like 30, mid 30s is when I started doing therapy. So all the time before that, what it would feel like, lack a sense of self, would be like kind of like going back to the ayahuasca, honestly. It's like just a purely sensory experience, basically. Like it's just
You're aware of them.
yeah, stuff's happening to you, and you're acting in the world too, but you're acting in the world in like a way that doesn't really seem like super embedded in reality, if that makes sense. You can imagine kind of you're tripping, you know that you're kind of acting in the world because you're choosing to either look this way or that way or like, whatever it is. It's not like there's no volition there. But it's mostly like you're just experiencing things. You're like a vessel for experience, I think, is like a good way to put it.
This sounds to me like severe depression or something. Like I'm walking through the world and I'm acting in the world, but I can't receive any of the inputs emotionally from it. It just
I think that's a really interesting thing. I will tell you, like, I'm super interested in like our self-conception and the way that our mind kind of interacts with it. And I am especially interested in kind of parallels to this. I think one interesting parallel is, nobody's born with a sense of self, right? Everybody develops a sense of self somewhere along the way. It's around, we think, the age of 2 when we start recognizing ourselves in a mirror. Isn't that so weird that we don't like? I saw a video the other day of an opossum that looked at himself in the mirror and then flipped over, played dead because it freaked itself out, right? And that's what we were. We're like dumb dogs or something barking at the reflection. For a long time, we didn't realize who we are or that that's who we are. And I think like all things that develop, there can be developmental issues, in developing a sense of self. And I think that's kind of what happened to me, is that I did not develop a strong sense of self. And so I could not reliably kind of get in touch with my sense of self. Like if somebody would say, just be yourself in a particular situation, there's no need to manipulate, I wouldn't know what to do. And that was honestly like how my therapy started. I went to my therapist because I knew I was manipulating in my relationships and I didn't know how to stop. And he was like, well, instead of manipulating, you just be yourself. That's like the opposite of manipulating people. And I was like, I don't know how to do that.
Did he know that you were a psychopath then?
Yes.
And he still gave you that advice?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But this was like 10, 12 years ago or something. I think people have started, the understanding of psychopathy is changing, I think, past whatever, 10 years. So he's saying be yourself or whatever. And then he realizes that's kind of one of the roots of my issues or something. But what does it feel like to not have a sense of self? Well, I also think this is interesting. When you think about memories, like most people can't remember back to their infancy, right? Can you?
No.
My earliest memory is like 5 years old. My little sister comes home from the hospital. I actually have an earlier one where we moved. I was 3. And the only reason I remember it is because our cat was in the car. And I think my little toddler self was like, cat shouldn't be in the car. What's the cat doing in the car? But I think probably sense of self is related to our experience of memory too. And it's weird too, like the ayahuasca, you start remembering things that it's especially weird because you remember every time basically that you've ever thought about ayahuasca comes to your the forefront of your mind. And you realize that it really is just our brain filtering things for us. Like the brain has so many things that it knows, that it remembers, and even that it sees. Like when under the effects of the ayahuasca, I was like, my vision is better. Like I can see motion better. And I caught and killed several mosquitoes just by hearing echolocation or whatever it was, hearing where they were and then being like, okay, let me catch them. So you understand that your brain is doing so much more than you are aware of. And so what is this idea of identity, the sense of self? I guess it's like one big kind of story that you tell yourself, but it's like also functions as sort of scaffolding that helps, almost like they say with, have you ever heard of like, what is it called? Like a palace of the mind or something, like a memory technique.
Mhm.
It's the sense of self is almost like a palace of the mind that just helps to structure something, or like, dressers or shelves in your bedroom, a closet, instead of just leaving everything on the floor. That I think is like probably the main benefit of a sense of self. And without a sense of self, I think we don't really have memory, because it's like, how do you connect enough to that memory to be able to tap back into it? You know how, like, you go on a vacation and suddenly when you're on vacation, you're remembering every other vacation you had
Right. Yes. Uh-huh.
because you have that way of tapping back into that memory. So I think self acts as like sort of like this lightning rod for some of our thoughts that kind of matter to us, or like strong core memories or whatever that allow us to access these, even when we are not in the situation that would normally allow us to access it. Because it's really hard to think a new thought out of nowhere, to remember something that you've forgotten out of nowhere. You usually have to be prompted. And I think like sense of self is almost like like the library computer system or whatever that's looking up where the book is, or if the library even has the book anymore, or maybe the book's gone or something. So without sense of self, it's really kind of just moment to moment. There's no history and there's no kind of future. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too, like how much of our sense of self is rooted in a story that we need to maintain, like there in artificial coherence with who we imagine that we want to be or that we are. So because we talk about like memories, like because you can go to a place and then like you did, like recall a memory that you didn't know that you had. It was in there the whole time, and it may have been in charge of how many decisions in your life, and you didn't even know it was there, and that was your actual self. And then you have the sense of self that's on top of that, that if you saw yourself doing that thing because of that thing back there that you don't have access to, then you tell yourself a story about why you intended to do that. Like, with split brain patients or whatever, just how much of the sense of self is just a facade to make sense of the things that you see yourself doing.
100%. Yeah, totally agree.
So then, what have you changed about the way you see the world or see sociopathy and psychopathy since publishing the book?
Before we get off
Sure.
sense of self, I guess too, I think some people come back to me, especially maybe like Buddhists or something, and say, sense of self is like this artificial thing that we kind of generate. And yes and no, I guess. Like a little bit more on this idea that you were saying, that we come up with reasons after the fact to justify some of our behaviors, and we know that's true. I think that is true, and I actually think there's a very interesting parallel between Buddhist monks, and psychopaths, is that they both have a low startle response. And they're both, this is such a weird study that they did, they're both able to spot victims, would-be victims, people who have like low self-defenses, maybe low self-esteem, somebody that would be more easily victimized by just watching them walk. So both psychopaths and Buddhist monks, have this very low startle response. Like if you shoot a gun or something, then they don't, they're not afraid, they're not startled. And if they watch people, they're able to see whether, there's something kind of wrong with them, that they might be like an easier victim than other people. And I do think there's something related to sense of self about that, because Buddhist monks, from my understanding, are really working on this idea that the self is an illusion. And I do think that the self is an illusion often, but I also think that the self can be grounded in reality. And I guess that's kind of where I am kind of exploring right now, is if your sense of self is useful because it acts as a scaffolding for things. And if without a sense of self, everything just seems like you're experiencing things from moment to moment with no real sense of continuity, into the past, or continuity going forward. And it's so, let's say, pointed of an experience to live life that way, that you probably feel like, have you ever heard of the amnesiac guy who only has 7 seconds of memory?
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he had like the bacteria or whatever get in his brain and like eat most of his brain, and now he has 7 seconds of memory. And you can read his journal entries, and they're like horrible. They're like
Yeah.
they're
Uh-huh.
terrible. He talks about like he's either, like this, I'm awake for the very first moment. This is the
Yeah.
first moment of my existence. And then they start getting really terrible, like 3 or 4, 5 years in, where he's like scratching things. He's like in a living hell or whatever, because he has no sense of continuity. He has no sense of meaning or purpose in his life. And such that what I watched recently, a documentary about him, one of his children, I believe, says they almost wish that he hadn't survived.
Yeah. I think several of his family won't visit him. They can't take it.
Yeah. So it's really horrible too. And the one I think even more common than, some of the common things I think, that you might see with psychopaths, they have like a fluid sense of gender or sexual orientation or something. The most common experience, other than boredom maybe, is that they experience a lack of meaning. Psychopaths tend to experience a lack of meaning. So without this scaffolding of self, I think you really run into this issue of lack of meaning. I've heard from some kind of like, let's say, Buddhist or transcendental thinkers that you don't need a lack of meaning if you can just exist in the present the whole time. And I don't think that's actually what's happening.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, because psychopaths, that's how they experience it. So I think, psychopaths are almost like an interesting natural experiment. What happens when you take away self?
Yep.
Like, is it nice? Like the Buddhists say? Or is it like a little bit weird, And I think maybe like the best way that you could kind of argue in their favor, the Buddhists who say you don't need a sense of self, you just need to experience things in the present all the time, is you are experiencing also yourself in the present, and you are also experiencing the reality of the past and the potential, let's say, of the future. So if you are truly in the present, you're experiencing those things because you're embodied in this way in a body that has existed, that was born out of some lady's womb, and that you've had these however many years of existence learning the things that you've learned. Like, you couldn't possibly say that you're not affected by the past, even if you're truly present in the present. Because you are made up of the past. You're literally everything that you've ever eaten. You are literally everything that you've ever been exposed to. Like the fact I'm speaking English, you're speaking English instead of French, was not a choice that we like made somewhere along the way. It's just like everything that we've experienced. So that's how I would kind of say to like the Buddhists, like, that's fine to be embodied in the present. But it's, in order to truly meet the present where it is, you have to understand that you are a person, who's experiencing these still through this filter that your brain is like not allowing you to see the motion or hear the mosquitoes like you want to, like you're still looking at the world through you colored glasses, and there's no way that you can let go of that. And that's just a reality. And that's fine then to meet that reality where it is too in the present, is the fact that you are a conglomeration of all these past experiences, beliefs, some of them need WD-40, some of them are loose, and whatever else it is. And I just think it's interesting because it's like Buddhists, I understand, because like sense of self can be very burdensome. Super burdensome. I see people all the time who are truly burdened by their sense of self. And it's often because they've kind of over-identified with things, like a favorite sports team or somebody who, they like the Chiefs are doing poorly right now. If you're a Chiefs fan, wow, you must be hurting, unless they still have hope or something. Or you're so identified with a political cause, or you're so identified with religious beliefs, or you're so identified with like how you grew up, your cultural, ethnic, whatever, racial backgrounds, that you're rigid, you're rigidly defined by these things that aren't even you. They're external to you. And because they're external to you, you don't control them. And so you're constantly feeling like overwhelmed because something that isn't you has such an influence in your life and the way that you even identify yourself. So those people, I think, Buddhism helps because, like, get a little way, like more gentle with your sense of self, like a weaker sense of self, but not even weak is like my real thought. My real thought is just like super grounded in reality, like things that are just accidents of your birth, what's happening to you, third parties, acting upon you, the context that you live in, the fact that it's sunny or rainy today. Like these things aren't you. you know, they can't possibly be you. You have no control over them. They have an effect on you, sure, but then just kind of understanding, that can't possibly come work into the sense of self. There's actually Paul Graham, who is I think he's called like a philosopher startup guy. He has a really good essay on this called "Keep Your Identity Small." It's like 2 paragraphs, and I think it's really good. That's what the Buddhism's directed at, is normal people. Psychopaths are already like way beyond Buddhist monks. Like we're way over here on the opposite extreme, and it's equally bad. And that makes sense to me, like in a way, because it's like everything in life seems like that. Our heart can't beat too fast or too slow. Our blood pressure can't be too high or too low. Our temperature can't be too high or too low, too hot or too cold. And so this idea that there is like kind of this sweet spot at which we operate the best makes sense to me. Like everything in life seems like that is true of it, and even like the thought, as a musician, I think about this, that everything has its own pitch, its own resonance. And when you see like the on TV or something, a movie, especially like during the 70s, these farce movies where opera singer sings and the glass breaks, that is a true thing, but only if the glass is pitched at that particular end.
Frequency.
Yeah, and super pure, and has probably some impurities in it that cause it to shatter. But that happens to bridges, like if the wind is blowing through at a particular frequency, and that's the frequency that the bridge is pitched to, then it will like keep, increasing and vibrate or whatever. So I think about that. Like, I think we're all pitched to something too, and not just like our bodies, although that certainly is true. But like, I think, using it in a more figurative sense, there are certain things that are true about us. And that was another funny thing about the ayahuasca. While I was trying to like breathe,
Okay.
like for like an hour, I just had to like stay awake and like just try to breathe, because my brain was like, we're not there. We're not out of the woods yet, like stay awake and stay breathing. And luckily there was a breeze that came, so that helped, but I still had to like very consciously like breathe for a long time. But then like in the back of my mind, all these kind of things from my subconscious. And actually this is an interesting thing too, speaking of the brain. I've been thinking about, I have like aphantasia.
Hey, welcome.
You have it too? Yeah.
I just found out this last week that I have hypophantasia, and yeah, it's kind of rocked my world a little bit.
It's so interesting. So for me, I see if people are like, picture like an apple in my mind, it's like a very weak, and it's only there for like a second or two, and it's like a green outline of an apple, and then it fades or whatever. So because of that though, and I found out like a few months ago, because of that, I can tell, because I still dream in color. So I can tell when an image is my conscious mind or my subconscious mind. So now I watch my subconscious mind, like in these like in between waking states as I'm going to sleep or waking up. I'll just like watch it and be like, this is nuts that this is what you want to think about. Like these different images or something. And the same thing with the ayahuasca is like, it felt like my subconscious mind was thinking about all the things it liked, which included, like barbershop quartet, like early 20th century, like bow tie, what do we call those hats?
Yeah, I don't know, barbershop quartet hats.
Yeah, like that aesthetic. It was like, we love this aesthetic. I was like, really? And also the color orange. It was like all orange stuff. I was like, do I like orange more than I think I do?
Right.
Because I've always thought of orange as like kind of like the bad color to like, and even gotten to the point where I'm like suspicious of people whose favorite color is orange. Like that's how, biased I've been about the color orange. I realize I just have not been allowing myself to love orange as much as I do. Now it's not my favorite, but
Right.
it's like in the top half.
it's the favorite of some part of you. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's analogous to like the psychopath label. Like, there was a part that liked orange, and you were like, "What are you, an orange liker?" And it's like, "Oh, never mind. I guess I'm not going to show up. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'll just hide away here." When really there's some joy to be had there.
Yeah.
So-
A ton of joy. The barbershop quartet stuff, the straw hat. That's what it is. A straw
there we go.
hat. I love that sort of stuff. That the old timey that era, like the 19 teens or something. I'm like, that's my vibe. Not even like
That's
the
cool.
cool 1920s, like this stuff where I just have like even now like a little bit of shame, oddly saying that I like these things. And just I think that's like so interesting to understand. So like that when the Buddhists are like, we have no self, I'm like, but somewhere in there something likes orange.
Well, and they're founded on the idea that life is suffering and that we need to detach ourselves from that. I'm like, wait a second, like, life is suffering. We need some of that. Like that's what we're here. We're here to engage with the reality of it, and hopefully not let it overwhelm you. Maybe you need a dose of psychopathy if it's doing too much to you. Maybe you need to do some meditating and detach from that. But when your goal is to become one with the universe, lose yourself, detach from your suffering. Like I was just in an interview not long ago with someone who was, they're like trying to talk about the dangers of meditation, and one of their clients was like trying to talk about how like she can't feel feelings towards her kids anymore, and she's troubled by this, and she's like, I've been meditating so much, and now like just I'm walking through life and there's nothing that I care about, and I'm like tucking my kids in at night because I think that's what you're supposed to do as a mom, and I remember that I used to care about them, but I don't really care about them anymore. And then like one of the Buddhist priests or whatever that was there was like, oh yeah, that's what we're aiming for. Like,
yeah,
alrighty, you should have put that in the pamphlet.
Yeah, screw those kids.
Well, they are suffering. Like kids are suffering. Like it's gonna end badly every time, but you still sign up for it because But anyway, what's a message that you wish that you could share with every sociopath out there?
I would say that there is an option to do something a little bit differently. And I don't even kind of mean like hope of a better tomorrow, but I think sometimes a psychopath gets to the point where they don't want to keep doing the same every day that they've been doing for the past few decades. They get sick of it themselves.
How long does that take?
I would say, so I have kind of an idea that there are like kind of cycles that a psychopath goes through. The two main ones, though, that I think are like most clearly visible are there's a playground stage, which usually happens in the late teens and into the 20s, like into the late 20s. And then what I call the reckoning.
Okay.
Which happens in like the late 20s.
Sounds less fun.
Yeah, it's less fun. It's terrible. I think that's the really bad because when you're in the playground stage, it's like you're Teflon. Everything just seems to like roll off. Even if there are consequences to your actions, and honestly, often there aren't, because if you just have the attitude that nothing's going to kind of matter to you, then it's weird how nobody even bothers to try to punish you. People are just kind of like, it's like punishing, trying to punish like Donald Trump for being un-PC or something. Like, it's not going to matter because he's already whatever. He's like Teflon. And so nothing really happens negatively to you until it kind of does. And then that's the reckoning. And then you're kind of like, maybe you're bothered by this kind of existential sense of lack of meaning that you have in your life. And maybe some of the consequences start to catch up with you. And if you're there, then you can't go back to the playground stage. And that's the unfortunate truth, I guess, to share to all these psychopaths listening is that would be great if we could all go back to the playground stage, but we can't for whatever reason. That it doesn't seem, I've not met somebody yet who's been able to go to the playground, back to the playground stage. So the only way out is through. And I guess the best thing that I have found, and I'm not saying that this is for everybody, but I can say just anecdotally for myself, for my girlfriend, and for several other psychopaths that I know, that building the sense of self is the way through. Is that once you build the sense of self, You actually do have more engagement with the world, with yourself. You end up growing like a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning. So it's not an easy process. It's like a 3 to 5 year process, and it sucks.
Does that sound attractive to a psychopath?
It would sound attractive to them if they're like in the depths of the reckoning, which is like so bad that you're like, there's no reason to do anything. Like nothing brings you joy anymore.
What message do you wish you could share with every non-psychopath?
For every non-psychopath, I would say, like, honestly, like a little Buddhism in your life is probably good. Like, I see some of people, like, you can see it on both ends. If you're kind of hypo or hyper, you can see that people are suffering with regard to sense of self, and that this idea of having like really good personal boundaries. Like everybody's permeable, to stuff around them. But some people are more permeable than others. Some people are really, tuned, they're hyper online, let's say, or they are, watching the news all the time, like their whole identity kind of revolves around this thing that's kind of external to them. And it's okay to have passions, of course, and it's okay to have things that engage us, yes. But there are costs to kind of spending so much time with things that are not really within your direct control. Like that can end up feeling really overwhelming pretty fast. And that's what I would kind of suggest to them is to reevaluate some of the stories that they tell themselves about why they're doing the things that they're doing and try to find things that they enjoy doing more. Honestly, like let go of some of the things that you're doing that you realize, I don't actually enjoy following, MSNBC News or something on my social media. Like I don't actually enjoy doing some of these things that I have gotten into a habit of doing, and instead try to explore what is the like real you. Like if we drill down to bedrock, what are some of the things? Is it orange, your favorite color, or is it something else? And that can be very liberating, I think, and very enriching. Because often I think we feel a sense of being stuck, and we think something about our life has to radically change. But often we can just drill deeper into the reality of us, and that is the thing that we need more than anything else.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think especially for people with too strong a sense of self or where their identity is wrapped up in that stuff, the answer for them is just like more of it, especially in the case of like religion or something like that, or politics, like, and you're feeling kind of empty, like, well, maybe I'm not doing enough of this thing. And so you just like try to get into it more. So, yeah, messages for people. Because if you have a strong sense of identity and your identity is tied up in this thing, and someone's like, well, maybe consider letting go of that. Like, then what am I? Like that's all of me. I put all of me in that. So then there's no me. Who cares what I am without that? So that's I think one of the braver things that humans can do is reimagine that. Yeah, there's potentially life on the other side of losing the thing that you currently identify as.
Yes. One thing I like to do for that is just to imagine things like, what if I was born 100 years before? What about myself do I think would be the same? What activities would I still enjoy doing? What thoughts would I still enjoy thinking about? And trying to kind of decontextualize yourself a little bit is like, I think, a good way to rid yourself of some of the rigidity about thinking, no, this is who I am. I'm this type of person that has only existed for the last decade
Right.
in terms of human conception.
Uh-huh. And the only thing that can bring me happiness is this thing that didn't exist 20 years ago. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you all for joining me. If you liked that, you're going to love part 2. That's right, she came back the next week to do a whole nother couple hours. And neither one of those interviews will tell the stories and cover the topics that she does very well in her book. It's called Confessions of a Sociopath, A Life Spent Hiding in Plain Sight. I couldn't put it down, so I went through the 336 pages in about 5 hours. And of the dozens of books I've read on the topic, it was instantly in the top 1 or 2. My hope for you is that you would get her book, throw your phone in a lake, and have your bare feet touch some real grass. But if you stick around to allow the billionaire tech gods to capture and train your attention, I hope to see you back here real soon. I don't know what's best for you, but I want you to be well, my distant cousins. I'm rooting for you, and you should too.